Thandiwe was a sweet, innocent 11-year-old girl who lived in the small village of Mawelera. Her heart was as pure as gold, always ready to help anyone in need. She spent most of her days playing with her friends and helping her mother, Amale, with chores around their humble home. Life had been simple for Thandiwe, filled with laughter and love. But everything changed when her father died mysteriously. One moment, her world was full of warmth, and the next, it was cast into darkness. Her mother, Amale, though devastated by the loss, found herself remarried to a man named Zuberi, a man whose bitterness seemed to seep through every word he spoke. Zuberi wasn't the kind of man who could ease Amale's sorrow. Instead, he brought more pain into their lives. He never showed affection for Thandiwe and instead let his hatred fester, his feelings toward her growing darker by the day. Thandiwe never understood why Zuberi treated her with such disdain. She was just a little girl, longing for love and attention like any child would. But to Zuberi, Thandiwe was a constant reminder of a past he wanted to erase. Her father's memory, her very existence, filled him with resentment, and he couldn't hide it. Zuberi's bitterness was a heavy cloud over their home, and it was clear that Thandiwe was the one he loathed the most. She tried so hard to be good, to do everything she could to please him, but it was never enough. She would clean the house, bring him food, and even try to make him smile, but it always felt like her efforts were crushed under the weight of his hatred. To Zuberi, Thandiwe was nothing more than a living reminder of a past that he wished to forget. And as days went by, the home that once held love and laughter became a place of cold silence and cruelty. Thandiwe could feel the growing tension, and it hurt her deeply, but she never let it show. After all, what could an 11-year-old do in the face of such hatred? But still, Thandiwe kept her kind heart, despite the pain. She didn't let Zuberi's bitterness break her spirit. Though the world around her seemed to grow colder, her love for her mother, Amale, remained unshaken. Thandiwe knew that despite everything, her mother needed her, and she was willing to endure whatever came her way. She kept her dreams alive, believing that one day her kindness would find a way to melt Zuberi's hardened heart. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Thandiwe couldn't help but wonder, would Zuberi ever see her for who she truly was? Would he ever understand that she wasn't just a reminder of her father, but a little girl in desperate need of love? Her heart ached for that day to come, but deep down, she knew that nothing would change until Zuberi found a way to let go of the past and accept her for who she was. Until then, Thandiwe's journey would be a difficult one, filled with trials, but also with the hope that one day the pain would fade and love would prevail. As time passed, Zuberi's hatred for Thandiwe didn't fade. Instead, it grew stronger and more unbearable. He began treating her like a servant in her own home, piling work onto her until she could barely keep her eyes open. Every day, she would wake up before the sun and work long hours, sweeping, cooking, cleaning, and doing everything Zuberi demanded. He would make her carry heavy loads of firewood and fetch water from the farthest well in the village, all while Jabari, her half-brother, lived in comfort, lounging around and being waited on hand and foot. Jabari, despite being just a little younger than Thandiwe, had it easy. He was Zuberi's son, and as far as Zuberi was concerned, Jabari could do no wrong. His life was filled with ease and luxury, while Thandiwe's life was a never-ending cycle of labor and cruelty. It wasn't fair, and it stung every time Thandiwe had to watch Jabari enjoy his food, while she was given only scraps. Zuberi's cruelty wasn't limited to just the work he forced on her. He also began withholding food. While Amale tried to make sure her daughter had enough to eat, Zuberi would scold her, telling her that Thandiwe didn't deserve any better. The scraps of food he threw at her were barely enough to fill her stomach, yet she accepted it in silence, knowing that any complaint would only lead to more punishment. Thandiwe learned quickly that speaking out only made things worse. Zuberi's punishments became harsher and more frequent, and each time he mistreated her, Amale would watch in silence, her face torn with helplessness. She wanted to protect her daughter, but she was trapped in a marriage where any attempt to speak out against Zuberi would lead to more threats. Zuberi's cruelty had a grip on the family, and Amale felt like she had no voice. Every time she tried to intervene, Zuberi would remind her in a cold, threatening voice that if she ever dared to question him again, he would make her life even more miserable. Thandiwe could see the pain in her mother's eyes, and it broke her heart even more. Amale was torn between her love for Thandiwe and her fear of Zuberi, a fear that kept her from standing up for her daughter. Thandiwe understood that her mother was trapped in this marriage, but that didn't make the situation any easier. Day after day, she endured the harsh treatment, hiding her pain behind a forced smile so her mother wouldn't worry. But the hurt was becoming too much to bear. Every time she was sent to bed without a proper meal, while Jabari sat at the table, laughing and eating his fill, her spirit broke just a little more. She was just a little girl, trying to hold on to whatever was left of her hope. Jabari, oblivious to the struggles Thandiwe faced, lived his life in complete comfort. Zuberi adored him, and no matter how much trouble Jabari got into, Zuberi would always find a way to excuse his behavior. If Jabari broke something in the house or made a mess, Zuberi would laugh it off, telling him it was just boys being boys. Thandiwe, on the other hand, could never get away with anything. She could barely take a breath without Zuberi finding fault in it. She was expected to be perfect, to always work harder and do more. Yet no matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. Thandiwe often found herself crying in the dark when no one could hear her. She longed for the days when her father was alive, when life was simple and filled with love. But now, everything seems so distant and unreachable. Zuberi's hatred, his cruelty, his disdain for her very existence, it all made her feel like she didn't belong, like she was nothing more than an unwanted burden. Yet through it all, Thandiwe never stopped loving her mother. She held on to that love, even when Zuberi's cruelty tried to strip it away. She knew her mother was not the enemy, that Amale's silence was a result of fear, not indifference. Despite all the suffering, Thandiwe clung to one hope. One day, things would change. One day, someone would see the injustice. Someone would stand up for her. Until that day came, she would keep surviving, keep fighting, and keep dreaming of a better life. But in her heart, she knew that hope was all she had left, and she wasn't about to let it go, no matter how dark the days became. One stormy night, the wind howled through the trees, and the rain poured down in heavy sheets. But inside the house, it was even darker. Zuberi, already in a foul mood, accused Thandiwe of stealing sacred coins from a hidden chest, an accusation that came out of nowhere. Thandiwe knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but Zuberi didn't care. His hatred for her had reached a boiling point, and this was the excuse he needed to make her suffer. His eyes burned with fury as he stormed toward her, his voice loud and full of venom. "You thief!" he shouted. "You will pay for what you've done." Before Thandiwe could say a word in her defense, Zuberi grabbed her by the arm and dragged her outside into the storm. The rain soaked her clothes in an instant, but it wasn't the cold that froze her heart. It was the look in his eyes, the rage that had been building for so long, finally erupting. Without a second thought, Zuberi shoved her into the muddy yard and slammed the door behind her. "Stay out here!" he screamed. "Let the dogs teach you a lesson." And just like that, Zuberi released the wild dogs, fierce, snarling beasts that had been trained to hunt and kill. Thandiwe could hear them growling in the distance, their eyes glowing in the dark. The sound of their paws pounding against the earth made her blood run cold. She was alone, trapped in the rain-soaked night, her heart racing as the dogs drew closer. She couldn't run, couldn't escape. The only thing she could do was run as fast as she could and hope that she could survive. Barefoot, with the storm battering her body and her heart shattered into pieces, Thandiwe sprinted into the dark forest. Each step felt like a dagger in her feet, the sharp rocks and twigs cutting into her skin. But she didn't care. She couldn't stop now. The dogs were closing in, and with every growl, every snap of their jaws, she felt her fear deepen. Her breath was ragged, and her body was trembling, but she pushed herself harder, running deeper into the forest where the trees loomed like shadows, hiding her from the world. Her legs ached and her chest burned, but the pain in her heart was worse. She had never felt so alone, so abandoned. Zuberi had done this to her, and Amala, her mother, had stood by and said nothing. The very people she loved and trusted had turned their backs on her. Thandiwe's mind raced with thoughts of how her life had been stolen from her. She had only wanted love, only wanted to belong, but all she had received was cruelty. Now the wild dogs were chasing her, and with every step it felt like the world was closing in. As the dogs howled behind her, Thandiwe's tears mingled with the rain. She was scared, terrified even, but she refused to let the fear control her. She was not going to die here, not tonight, not like this. She couldn't let Zuberi win, not after everything he had already taken from her. She had to keep running, keep surviving. Her legs felt like they were going to give out, but she pushed on, driven by a will to survive, to escape the nightmare that had been her life for so long. The forest was her only hope. The wild dogs had the speed, but Thandiwe had the will. She kept running, dodging trees, jumping over roots, feeling the rainwater soak her to the bone. The dogs were getting closer. She could hear them, feel their hot breath on her heels. And then she saw a dark shape ahead, a cave. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. Thandiwe bolted for it, praying she could make it inside before the dogs caught up to her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she reached the cave, slipping inside just as the first of the dogs lunged at her. She barely made it, her heart racing as the dogs clawed and scratched at the entrance, unable to get in. Thandiwe collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, her body bruised and bloodied, but alive. Alone in the dark, the weight of everything hit her. She was free from the dogs, but she was still trapped in a life of pain and loneliness. That night, as the storm raged on outside, Thandiwe curled into a ball in the cold, dark cave. Her body was battered, her heart was broken, but in that moment, one thing became clear. She wasn't going to give up. She had survived, and as long as she was still breathing, there was still hope. Thandiwe was barely holding on to life when she was found. The storm had slowed to a drizzle, and the cave was quiet, but Thandiwe could feel her body growing weaker by the second. Her wounds burned, and her bones ached from the cold. But just as the darkness threatened to swallow her whole, a figure appeared in the entrance of the cave. It was a man, tall and strong, with a weathered face that spoke of countless battles and untold stories. His name was Makonnen, a wandering warrior healer who had travelled far and wide across the land. When he saw Thandiwe lying there barely alive, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Makonnen gently approached her, his experienced hands steady as he checked her injury. He could see the pain in her eye, but there was something else, something that told him she wasn't ready to give up. Without a second thought, he scooped her up in his arms and carried her away from the cave, determined to save her life. Makonnen took Thandiwe to a small hidden village he called home, a place where only the strongest could survive. There he tended to her wounds, applying herbal remedies to her cuts and bruises, and slowly brought her back from the brink of death. For days, Thandiwe remained unconscious, her body too weak to respond. But as time passed, she began to heal, and with that healing came a sense of clarity. When she finally opened her eyes, she was no longer alone, and Makonnen's face was the first thing she saw. He smiled at her with kind eyes, a stark contrast to the cruelty she had known. Thandiwe could hardly believe what had happened, but the reality was undeniable. She was alive, and someone had cared enough to save her. Makonnen didn't just heal her body, he healed her spirit. He began teaching her everything he knew about survival, strength, and strategy. Every day, he showed her how to move like the wind, how to fight like a warrior, and how to endure even when the world seemed against her. He taught her to trust her instincts, to never back down, and to use her mind as much as her strength. It wasn't easy, but Makonnen never gave up on her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had driven her to run from the dogs, and he knew she had the potential to become something far greater than she could ever imagine. As the years passed, Thandiwe transformed. She was no longer the frightened little girl who had been cast aside and abandoned. She became a force to be reckoned with. Her body grew strong, her mind sharp, and her skills in battle unmatched. She learned to wield weapons with deadly precision, to track her enemies through the forest, and to use the land around her to her advantage. She became not only a survivor, but a warrior, wise beyond her years. Her heart, once shattered by the cruelty of her stepfather, now burned with a fierce determination to never be weak again. Makonnen had given her the tools to fight, but he had also given her something more. He had given her purpose. Thandiwe no longer saw herself as a victim. She no longer saw herself as the girl who was discarded, left to die in the storm. She had become a warrior, a protector, and a woman who could stand up for herself and fight for what she believed in. And every lesson Makonnen taught her had one goal: to prepare her for the world that awaited her outside of his village, a world where she would need all of her strength and wisdom to survive. By the time she was ready to leave, Thandiwe was unrecognizably strong. Her once fragile body had become a powerhouse, and her mind had become a well of strategy and cunning. She was no longer the girl Zuberi had tried to break. She was someone new, someone fierce, someone unstoppable. And with a heart full of gratitude for the man who had saved her, Thandiwe knew one thing for certain: she was ready for whatever came next. No longer would she be the hunted. She had become the hunter. While Thandiwe was training in the quiet mountain, far from the chaos of the world, her kingdom was slowly crumbling into ruin. The once proud land that had been filled with prosperity and peace was now plagued by endless war, drought, and a growing sense of injustice. Villages burned, crops withered under the hot sun, and the people, once joyful and proud, now lived in fear. The kingdom had lost its way, and the people began to lose hope. It all started when the king, once a strong ruler, fell ill. His health deteriorated quickly, and despite the best efforts of his healers, he passed away, leaving no heir to take his place. The throne was left vacant, and the land fell into a deep uncertainty. The royal family had no sons, and the kingdom's future seemed to hang in the balance. Factions began to form, each with its own claim to the throne, and as the months passed, the once united kingdom split into chaos. The rulers of neighboring lands saw the weakening of the kingdom as an opportunity, launching attacks and further destabilizing the people. The people were desperate for a solution, but the infighting and political struggle seemed endless. No one could agree on a ruler, and even those in power seemed more interested in gaining control than in fixing the country's problems. The kingdom's army was stretched thin, and the people's trust in their leaders was waning. It felt as though the entire kingdom was on the verge of collapse. In the midst of this turmoil, the nobles, desperate for a solution, came up with a bold idea, a way to determine who was worthy to rule. They declared a tournament, but not just any tournament. This would be a contest like no other, one that would test every aspect of a person's abilities. The challenge would not only measure strength but also wisdom, strategy, and the ability to lead. The strongest, the wisest, the most skilled woman would earn the right to claim the throne. This decision shocked many, but it also sparked hope in others. It was a chance for a new ruler to rise, one who could restore the kingdom to its former glory, or perhaps even make it better than it had been before. Women from all corners of the kingdom and beyond began to gather in the capital, ready to prove their worth. The tournament promised to be fierce, and the stakes could not have been higher. The kingdom's future was now tied to this competition, and the winner would have the power to change everything. As the tournament's date drew closer, whispers of the competition began to spread. Some saw it as a chance to finally see a woman lead with wisdom and strength, while others doubted whether any woman could truly be fit to rule. But the truth was, the kingdom didn't have much of a choice. With the old guard falling apart and chaos spreading, this was their only shot at salvation. In the midst of this turmoil, a new fire burned in Thandiwe's heart. She had spent years training in the wilderness, honing her skills under the guidance of Makonnen. But the world she had once known, the kingdom she had been born to, was now calling her. Thandiwe knew that this was not just any tournament, it was the key to everything. It was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment she could step out of the shadows and take her place in the world. The tournament wasn't just about fighting, it was about more than that. It was about wisdom, strength, and leadership, qualities that Thandiwe had spent years mastering. The thought of returning to the kingdom and fighting for the throne filled her with a new sense of purpose. She had survived the worst, and now it was time to rise, not just for herself, but for the people of the kingdom who had suffered for so long. The kingdom was falling apart, but this tournament, the chance to lead, to heal, to restore, was Thandi's moment. The chaos that had torn the kingdom apart was the same chaos that could give her the power to change it forever, and she was ready to fight for that change. Thandiwe, now 23, had changed beyond recognition. The girl who had once been abandoned in the wilderness, left to die, had become something else entirely. She returned to her homeland, but not as the frightened little girl who had fled the cruelty of her stepfather. No, she came back as a masked warrior, a force so powerful, so mysterious, that even the bravest of warriors feared her. Her presence alone sent ripples through the village of Mawalera, as whispers of her strength and skill spread like wildfire. The villagers, who had once known her as a helpless child, now spoke of the masked fighter who moved like a shadow, swift, silent, and deadly. They said she had the strength of a lion, her combat skills unmatched, and a wisdom beyond her years. The name Thandiwe was never spoken aloud. Instead, they called her the Lioness of the Wild. Her face remained hidden beneath a mask, adding to her enigma, leaving the villagers to wonder if she was a ghost, a goddess, or something far more dangerous. Thandiwe didn't just return to Mawalera for revenge. She came for something much greater. The kingdom was falling apart, the people were suffering, and the tournament that promised to crown the new ruler had already begun. She knew this was her chance to change everything. But she didn't come to the tournament as a princess or a noblewoman. She came as a warrior, determined to prove her worth through actions, not words. With each trial, Thandiwe impressed and stunned everyone who witnessed her skills. The first test was one of wisdom. The elders of the village, who had once dismissed her as a mere child, set a series of complex riddles and challenges designed to test her intellect. Thandiwe answered each one without hesitation, her mind sharp and focused. The villagers had never seen such clarity, such depth of thought in someone so young. Her wisdom was like a wellspring, flowing with knowledge and experience that could only come from a life lived through hardship. Next came the test of bravery. The villagers set up a mock battle with fierce opponents, each one trying to break her down. But Thandiwe stood tall, unwavering in the face of danger. Her movements were fluid, precise, and fearless. She fought not with anger, but with calm determination, proving that true courage wasn't just about physical strength. It was about control, about knowing when to strike and when to hold back. She emerged victorious, not a scratch on her, while her opponents lay defeated at her feet. The third test was one of compassion. The people of Mawalera had long forgotten the meaning of kindness. Years of war and suffering had hardened their hearts, but Thandiwe's heart had not hardened. Despite all the pain she had endured, despite the cruel treatment she had suffered, she still carried a deep empathy for those in need. When the trial required her to tend to the wounded, she didn't hesitate. She healed with gentle hands, treating both the sick and the broken without judgment. She showed them that compassion could heal even the deepest wounds, and in doing so, she won their respect and admiration. Finally, the most important test of all, combat. The tournament had drawn warriors from across the land, each one hoping to claim the throne for themselves. They came with swords, shields, and pride, but Thandiwe came with nothing but her skills, honed over years of relentless training. The fight was brutal. The ground shook with every blow, but Thandiwe never faltered. Her movements were lightning fast, her strikes precise and deadly. One by one, she defeated her opponents, not just with strength, but with strategy. She outsmarted them, outlasted them, and in the end stood alone as the last woman standing. The villagers watched in awe, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The girl they had once forgotten had become the strongest woman they had ever seen. She had passed every test, and with each victory, she proved that she was not just a survivor of her past, but a force that could change the future. The lioness had returned, and with her, the hope of a kingdom that had long been lost. The moment Thandiwe stepped into the royal palace, she knew the time had come. The kingdom was on the brink of change, and it was her moment to finally step into the light. After proving herself in the tournament, she had earned the respect and admiration of not just the villagers, but the most powerful people in the land. The elders and seers, who had once dismissed her as a mere girl, now saw her for who she truly was: a warrior, a leader, the rightful queen. The air was thick with anticipation as the coronation ceremony began. The grand hall was filled with the sounds of chanting and music, but it was the silence before the ceremony that felt the most powerful. Everyone was waiting, everyone was watching. The kingdom's fate rested on this moment, and as the procession moved forward, all eyes were on Thandiwe. Dressed in a regal gown that sparkled with the promise of a new era, she walked with the poise and dignity of someone who had already conquered much. The once helpless girl was now the embodiment of strength, wisdom, and leadership. As the ceremony continued, the final moment arrived. The elders, with solemn faces, stepped forward, offering her the crown. It glistened in the light, a symbol of power, but Thandiwe didn't need the crown to define her. She had already proven who she was. She knew that what she was about to do would change everything. Thandiwe reached up and slowly, deliberately, removed the mask that had hidden her identity for so long. The entire hall fell silent. In that moment, every eye was fixed on her as she revealed her face to the world. It wasn't just her beauty that stunned them. It was the sheer strength and determination in her eyes, the same eyes that had witnessed suffering and pain, but had never once given up. The eyes of a queen. Amala, Thandiwe's mother, was the first to react. She gasped and fainted, her body collapsing as she realized the truth. The daughter she thought she had lost forever was standing before her. The shock, the disbelief, it was too much for her to bear. She had never imagined that the girl she had abandoned to Zuberi's cruelty would return as this powerful figure, let alone as the queen of the kingdom. Amale's heart raced, a whirlwind of emotions flooding over her. Zuberi, standing nearby, couldn't hide his fear. His knees shook, and for the first time in years, he felt small. The girl he had tormented, the one he had treated as nothing more than a servant, was now standing before him as the ruler of the kingdom. His face turned pale as he realized the gravity of the situation. Thandiwe wasn't just a child of another man. She was the new queen, the one who would decide his fate. The crowd, stunned at first, began to murmur. The realization of who Thandiwe was spread quickly, like wildfire. It wasn't just the mask she had removed. It was the years of pain, struggle, and resilience that she had endured to get to this point. The people could see it in her. They saw the leader they had been waiting for. They saw a queen who had not been handed her power, but who had earned it, who had fought for it. And then, something incredible happened. One by one, the people in the crowd began to bow. They didn't bow out of fear. They bowed out of respect. Respect for the woman who had risen from the ashes of her past to become their queen. A queen who would restore peace, bring justice, and fight for them the way she had fought for herself. The entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath as the realization set in. Thandiwe was not just their queen, she was their hope. As the crowd knelt before her, Thandiwe stood tall, her heart filled with a quiet strength. She knew that this was just the beginning. The crown, the title, it was only a symbol. What mattered now was what she would do with the power she had earned. And as the crowd bowed before her, Thandiwe made a silent promise to herself and to the kingdom. She would rule with wisdom, strength, and compassion, ensuring that no one would ever have to suffer as she had again. The crown was hers, but the real work was only just beginning. Thandiwe stood tall, her eyes fixed on Zuberi as he stood before her, trembling. The once intimidating man, who had tormented her for years, now seemed so small. His arrogance had faded, replaced by fear and regret. But Thandiwe wasn't here for revenge. She had long ago let go of the bitterness that had fueled her pain. Now, standing as the queen of the kingdom, she was ready to face him, not with anger, but with something far more powerful: justice. There was no loud shouting, no wild accusations. Thandiwe's voice was calm, her words measured, each one carrying the weight of years of suffering. You left me to die in those mountains, Zuberi. You thought I would never return, but here I am. And now you will experience what you once thought was my fate. Zuberi's face went pale as the reality of her words sank in. He tried to speak, to beg for mercy, but Thandiwe raised a hand, silencing him. She wasn't interested in excuses or pleas. She had suffered too much to let him manipulate her once again. Her decision was made. With a final, powerful gesture, Thandiwe banished him. She ordered him to the mountains, the same harsh, unforgiving place where she had once been abandoned to perish. The cold winds, the rocky terrain, it would be his punishment. He would wander in the desolate wilderness, alone and vulnerable, with only the harsh conditions to guide him. It was a fate he had once wished on her, but now it was his reality. The silence in the room was deafening as Zuberi, for the first time, truly understood the consequences of his actions. He wasn't a king anymore. He wasn't even a man of power. He was just a broken, forgotten man who would be left to fend for himself. As Zuberi was escorted out of the palace, Thandiwe's gaze shifted to her half-brother, Jabari. The young man had always been sheltered, living a life of comfort, while Thandiwe had struggled in the shadows. But now, Jabari stood before her, his face filled with regret. He had watched as his mother had ignored Thandiwe, as their father had mistreated her, and in the end, he had stayed silent, never stepping in to stop the cruelty. He had been blind to her pain, caught up in the life of luxury that had been handed to him. Jabari looked at Thandiwe, his eyes filled with guilt. "I'm sorry, Thandiwe," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have known. I should have stood up for you. I was wrong." Thandiwe paused, her heart softened by his apology. She had every reason to turn her back on him, to let him suffer the consequences of his ignorance. But she wasn't that person anymore. She had learned that forgiveness wasn't about letting others off the hook. It was about freeing herself from the chains of anger. "I'm not asking for your apology," Thandiwe replied, her tone firm yet kind. "I'm asking for your change. You'll work the royal farms. You will learn what it means to serve, to work with your hands. Your life will be different now." Jabari's eyes widened in shock. This was not the life he had imagined for himself. He had been accustomed to luxury, to being waited on, but now he understood. He had to earn his place, just as Thandiwe had earned hers. He nodded, humbled by her words. "I will do whatever it takes," he said, his voice steady. Thandiwe watched as Jabari walked away, knowing that her decision was just. She didn't need to punish him. Life would do that on its own. Instead, she was giving him a chance to learn humility, to understand the struggles that she had faced. It wasn't a punishment, it was a lesson, and Thandiwe knew that, in time, he would grow. He would see the world through her eyes, and perhaps, just perhaps, he would become the man he was meant to be. As the day ended, the weight of Thandiwe's decisions settled over her. Karma had arrived, not with anger, but with silence. The kingdom had been reshaped, not by force, but by the quiet power of justice. And in that silence, Thandiwe knew she had done what was right, for herself, for her family, and for the people who had been waiting for a leader who understood the true meaning of strength. Thandiwe stood tall in her throne room, her crown gleaming with the weight of a kingdom that trusted her. Yet, despite the power she held, there was an ache in her chest, a pain that no title or royal robes could erase. She ruled wisely, with a sharp mind and a just heart, but deep inside, the scars of her past were never far from her thoughts. Every decision she made, every law she passed, was coloured by the suffering she had endured. She had learned from her pain, but she would never forget it. The people adored her. They saw the strong, confident queen who had risen from nothing to lead them through turbulent times. But Thandiwe knew that her strength came not from power, but from survival. From the days spent alone, fighting for survival in the wilderness, to the nights she spent haunted by memories of her stepfather's cruelty. Those experiences shaped her in ways no one could fully understand. She was a queen, yes, but she was also a woman with a scarred heart, and she would carry those scars with her forever. Yet, from her pain, Thandiwe created something beautiful, something that would outlast her reign and touch the lives of many. The House of the Unwanted was born, a place where abandoned children could find refuge, a safe haven where they could grow, heal, and learn. It was a place where children, just like the one she had once been, could find the love and care they deserved. She poured her heart into it, ensuring that every brick laid, every room furnished, was a reflection of her own journey, a journey from abandonment to acceptance, from pain to purpose. The orphanage became a symbol of hope, a testament to the strength of a woman who had refused to let her past define her. She visited often, speaking with the children, teaching them lessons about resilience, kindness, and the power of love. Thandiwe understood them better than anyone. She knew what it was like to feel lost, unwanted, and unloved. But she also knew that no matter how dark the past, there was always a chance for a brighter future. While Thandiwe's heart had been scarred, the pain had not hardened her. If anything, it had made her more compassionate. She could see the hurt in others and knew exactly what to say, what to do to help them heal. And as her kingdom flourished, she never allowed herself to forget the broken souls she had once been. She made sure that no one in her kingdom would ever feel as invisible as she had. At the palace, things had changed for her mother, Amale, too. The woman who had once stood by, powerless against her husband's abuse, was now free. With Zuberi gone and Thandiwe on the throne, Amale finally found peace. She was appointed as the matron of the palace kitchen, a position of respect and authority that allowed her to live a life of dignity. No longer was she a silent victim in the shadows of her husband's tyranny. Now, she stood tall in her own right, leading the kitchen with a steady hand and a heart full of gratitude for the freedom she had long been denied. Thandiwe often visited her mother in the kitchen, watching as Amale prepared meals for the royal family with care and love. The transformation in her mother was striking. Gone was the woman who had walked with her head down, her spirit crushed under the weight of abuse. In her place stood a woman who had found her strength again, a woman who, despite everything, had never lost the capacity for kindness. It filled Thandiwe's heart with a quiet joy to see her mother so at peace, so content. Though the scars of her past would never fully heal, Thandiwe had found a way to turn her pain into something beautiful. As a queen, she ruled with a heart full of compassion, building a legacy not of power, but of love and justice. And through it all, she never forgot the children who had no one to protect them, the mother who had suffered in silence, or the young girl who had once been lost, but now stood as a beacon of hope. Thandiwe's story soon spread far beyond the borders of Mawelera, carried by the winds and the whispers of every village, town, and city across the continent. The tale of the girl who had been left to die by the wild dogs, yet returned not just to survive but to thrive, captivated everyone. She became a symbol of resilience, strength, and the kind of justice that could only come from a heart tested by fire. The words, "They left me for dead, but I returned to bury their wickedness in law," echoed in the hearts of those who had long been oppressed, those who had felt abandoned and forgotten. Her journey from an innocent child, abused by a bitter stepfather, to the fierce, compassionate queen who ruled with wisdom and justice, resonated with people everywhere. It wasn't just about power, it was about redemption, the idea that no matter how broken or beaten down you are, you can rise. Thandiwe's rise wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, and mental. Her story became a rallying cry for the underdog, a reminder that even the most desperate situations can be overcome if you don't let the world define you. As the tale of the girl who survived the dogs reached the ears of the people, her name became a legend. "Never underestimate a child of pain," was the phrase that travelled from the mouths of those who had seen firsthand. how pain can be the birthplace of greatness. It wasn't just a message of survival, it was a warning to those who believed they could break others and get away with it. The story painted a clear picture. Zuberi's cruelty couldn't crush Thandiwe. The wild dogs couldn't destroy her, and even the darkest nights of her life couldn't erase the light that burned inside her. She had learned the greatest lesson of all. Pain doesn't define you unless you let it. It can either break you or make you stronger. Thandiwe chose to let it make her stronger. She chose to rise, not just for herself, but for every single person who had ever been underestimated, abused, or left to suffer in silence. People started to tell her story to their children, using it to teach them the values of resilience, justice, and courage. Let the dogs bark, they would say, but let the queens rise. It became more than a mantra. It became a way of life for many. The dogs of the world, those who would seek to tear you down, could bark all they wanted. But it was the queens, the ones who had faced the harshest trials and emerged victorious, who would ultimately reign. Thandiwe's name lived on in every village, whispered with reverence. To the oppressed, she wasn't just a queen. She was proof that no matter how far you've fallen, you can always rise again. And those who had wronged her, they were nothing but a distant memory, overshadowed by the greatness of a woman who had once been just a little girl with nothing but the will to survive. Her story was a powerful reminder that while others might try to tear you down, your strength, your heart, and your fight will always outlast their hatred. Let them bark, let them try, but you, just like Thandiwe, can rise and become something they never saw coming, something unstoppable, a queen. Thank you so much for watching. If Thandiwe's story inspired you, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your friends. Make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories like this and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of inspiration. Remember, no matter how hard life gets, you have the strength to rise. Stay strong, and until next time,